this subhead in the first chapter of your book that just says Idaho is a shithole. And I just wanted to ask you what your relationship to Idaho is.
I actually don't hate Idaho. I think I had a series of like weird experiences there, and my grandma lives out there, and it's actually really beautiful. And I actually, when I was working on the book and I knew it was going to be released, I was like, oh, having Idaho as a giant shithole in the titles, maybe like, am I going to get an email from I don't know, the mayor of, not the mayor of Idaho, but like someone upset. But it was in relationship to a relationship with like an ex that had moved out there, and I was just kind of mourning for her of like, why are you here? You're not happy.
So you write poetry, you write music. Where do you see the overlap between those two?
I mean, I feel like music and poetry are different beasts for me, but the overlap is really in the writing process itself. It's really insular for me. It's really sacred. And I would say like 90% of the things that I write, I don't ever release or share. I'm really intentional, and I try to be thoughtful about what I decide to put out into the world. I just don't believe in like a saturation of content. I believe in being thoughtful about what we release, and if, hopefully that pieces that are out there, don't unintentionally harm people or aren't unkind, that I believe in like civic duty with art, and that there's an accountability for people with platforms to not do harm to the world. So I think the overlap is also in performance and sharing as well. So because I feel like with writing and performance, there's this duality of the insular and then the invitation afterwards of like, I will let you into this process, and I will let you into this sharing, and let people see a vulnerable side of me, and hopefully that becomes an extension where I'm able to facilitate growth and healing for somebody else.
So you mentioned civic duty. Do you see your poetry as a form of activism?
I don't intentionally write poetry with activism in mind, but I know that my identity is inherently political, and what I write talks about things that are often uncomfortable for people, or like content that isn't maybe of the norm. And so I think I would say that my writing is radical in some ways, and I do believe that there's an urgency to vulnerable, authentic writing, especially with people that have stories like mine, that are queer, or deal with mental illness or body image or sexual assault. And so I think those stories are really important to tell right now, and I believe that there is a duty to be vulnerable. I don't believe that everybody has to do that, but I know that I have the capacity to do it, and I have sort of the strength and power and like sort of psychic calmness to do it and feel protected.
So we're talking about vulnerability. In your book, you write about trauma that you experienced as a child.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could tell me about that, and what compelled you to reveal that to the world.
I've always been really open about trauma that I've experienced, and I talk really explicitly about my rape in the book, and I'm a child of incest, and talking about those things for me started really early. I think I've been in therapy for 25 years. It just means since I was like 4. And so I've always understood the value of talking about grief and sadness and hard things, because it affords a full, uninhibited life of joy. I really do subscribe to the belief that without being present in your darkness and sadness, you can't be completely joyful either. Like it really provides context for joy and good things. And so I feel fortunate to be able to have the capacity to share these things. And I think also with being vulnerable and sharing trauma, it acts as an immediate opener for somebody else to have a moment where they can reflect, where they can think, oh God, what haven't I processed, and what do I need to process? And I guess I feel it's also a responsibility to do so, because I live such a full, like, joyful, vibrant, uninhibited life. And I know what it's like to feel really riddled with shame and darkness. And, I attempted suicide when I was 17. And I now, as a 29-year-old, I'm like, I could not fathom. Like, I get tattoos now and I'm like, why am I doing this? This hurts. Like, I have a whole new perspective on the value of life. And I think I got really far from your question.
No, that's great. I was going to ask, I wonder, do you think, or has this sort of political moment that we're in with METOO influenced your writing at all?
I think the current social political climate has created an urgency for the sharing of stories for me personally. I have always been writing pieces and art and music that reflect my processing and healing. But I think I have felt more of a pressing urgency to share and connect in a way that I hadn't really before. And I feel like stories like mine are really important to hear right now. I think with trauma, and especially assault, we have this like almost canned narrative that people are accustomed to hearing and seeing. And I think there are just such a variety of experiences that people have, and a variety of ways that people process. And I think all of those ways are valid and important. And I think it's a good reminder that not all healing looks the same, and not all solutions are identical. One act of violence can shift your life dramatically for the entirety of your life. And so I think for some people that haven't experienced violence in that way can't really fathom how one moment can change you. And so I think that's why these stories and this poetry for me is so important and urgent, because it provides a lens not only for facilitating a greater healing for people that have survived things like this, but also as a lens for people that don't understand or haven't experienced that, to empathize.
What's been the response you've gotten so far?
It's been really good. I mean, it's slow. I'm so used to music releases, which are almost like they're instantaneous because people consume the album in like an hour. And so with the book, there's more of a process. People are considering it and looking at the cover and then reading it and maybe taking their time. And it's actually really helpful as someone that's bipolar, because it's calming, it's slow, and I think this is the first release of anything that I've done that I'm really detached from the outcome, and I don't care. I don't care what happens. I just feel really proud of this thing that I've accomplished, and I know that it was extremely healing for me. And even if it just reaches a small audience, I think that it will be helpful in healing and be maybe a catalyst for other people's healing.
That's also good to hear as like a person who creates things, that like sometimes the creating is valuable in and of itself.
Yeah.
So part 3 of your collection is about living with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of those sort of mental illnesses that doesn't...
Sometimes I'm scared to talk about being bipolar because it looks different for different people. And I have sort of rapid cycling manic depression, so my cycling happens pretty like not frequently, but in more concentrated cycles. And I'm also on medication, and I also do sort of psychic spiritual therapy and sometimes talk therapy. So for me, my process looks so much different than maybe other people's, and I would say I'm a pretty high functioning person with my mental illness, and some people aren't that fortunate. And so I'm I'm a little hesitant to give advice because I don't know what someone else's experience is. So I try to be really explicit in that, you know, what works for me has worked for me, and it might work for somebody else. But
So you also write about your body. What is that process easy, difficult? Is that something you had to build yourself up to, or did it come naturally?
I think I've always talked about sort of my issues with body image. I really went from complete self-hatred and self-loathing and hating my body, and I was like significantly smaller than I am now, and I hated it. I thought I was, you know, I thought I was just so ugly and that I would never be loved. And now I'm, you know, I can't believe like if you would have told 19-year-old me that I'm on stages wearing a crop top at this size, I would have like punched you. I would have been like, don't let her do that. Does she know what she looks like? And I'm just so confident and sure of myself. But there's still like bad body days, and the only um, fear that I had when releasing this book and talking explicitly about body image in that way is that there are still issues that I'm working through, and like for as far as I've come in my journey to loving my body, which has been an arduous process. It's not something that happens instantly. I feel like there's this thing that's like tied up in a bow, this ideology of just love yourself as you are. Like if it was that simple, I would have done it already. It's not about flicking a switch on. It's a really slow process, and I feel like there are actual concrete tools that aren't widely discussed that can actually be helpful in that process. So I'd love to write like a guidebook at some point of like my sort of journey. But in this book, I talk about still some of the struggles that I have, and things that I'm still working through. And I was a little scared to do that because I want to be this, you know, this solid, sure of herself person. And that's honestly one of the aspects that I was nervous about, because I'm being vulnerable in that doubt and in that learning.
I just have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
So is there like a topic that you write about that you think is the most difficult?
I don't know that the writing process for me proves one trauma or aspect of my identity that is more difficult than the other, but I would say that some of the sharing is more difficult. I think talking about incest makes people really uncomfortable, and I think as like a child of incest, it's something that I'm still working through sharing, because it's a dark thing, and I spent much of my life feeling really weird and uncomfortable with myself, and thinking that I was unclean or not well, and that I would never be like pure or good. And that sort of binary thinking, I think, is really harmful, because you'll never be good enough because you've been wronged. And I think it's important to destigmatize circumstances that happen to people rather than decisions that they've made or something. And I think we have to be more forgiving and kind to ourselves for circumstances that we weren't able to control, or maybe when we were children something happened to us, and that, you know, I mean, everybody says it, but it's like, it's not your fault that this thing happened to you. It is your responsibility to heal and to not perpetuate these things. It's like really important to work through. And so I wish there was more of a conversation of that, and that's like really difficult to share with people because I'm still working through it. So that one.
Last question. Is there anything that you would want to say to people who might be struggling with mental illness, or might have experienced sexual trauma, or might be uncomfortable with their bodies, etc.?
I mean, honestly, I
just gotta wrestle.
I just realized, yeah. I, rather than giving advice in a wrapped up in a bow, I'll say something that, as a concrete tool that worked for me when I was working through shame and processing my own traumas and dealing with my brain the way it's wired. The biggest, most helpful thing that I did was I studied my brain. I analyzed my thought patterns. I analyzed when certain things fired. I analyzed the brain chemicals that were going to certain parts of my body. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this tightness right here. Why is that happening? What exchange caused that? Where does that stem from? How can I work through that? And I think just the very analysis of your own thought processes can be really helpful. And I started talking to myself. I know that sounds like it could be potentially like a flag, but I started kind of coaching myself, and you know, positive self-talk can really be helpful because I think it helps verbalize your own thought patterns, and you can begin that rewiring process, because so much of trauma ends up materializing as coping mechanisms. And some of those coping mechanisms can be really harmful. So in a way that you can, you know, if you want to live a full uninhibited life, these are things that you're going to have to process and move through. And I think for people with mental illness, it's sometimes comfortable to say, well, this is happening to me because I have bipolar disorder, or this is happening to me because I have anxiety, and to not take ownership of it. And there's sometimes I'm going to freak out. Like, that's just going to happen sometimes. But there are other times when I make a conscious decision to go down a hole that I don't need to. And so I guess taking ownership of my own brain and taking it into my own hands, rather than looking at the rest of the world to fix me or make my life better, or be I want to take accountability for my own brain, and I would urge others to do the same that are struggling with trauma or things like that. This one?
Yeah.
My collection of poetry, Shame is an Ocean I Swim Across, is out now. You can get it everywhere. You might want a box of tissues or your therapist on call, but it was really formative and helpful for me, and you might like it too. Dear 19-year-old self, I hear you whispering to that flashing black star. Yes, you are ugly in that nightgown. You are ugly in that silver moon night, crookedly holding a margarita. You were as ugly as the day you were born, as ugly as a field of tulips bursting red, as ugly as glittering snow on evergreens, as ugly as laughter. Mary, do you understand what I am saying? You are a creation, a gift, Tell them you were born for this life. Tell them your heart is a bludgeoned castle. Tell them you've got room, you've got safe stone. When they say that you laugh too much, tell them that your laughter is a skeleton key. You laugh because you've seen so much dying. You laugh because living is an absurd joy. To laugh is to be grateful for salt, for sweat, for crying. You know this. Mary, I know that the kitchen linoleum feels like an answer to a puzzle. I know you lay on it chain smoking, wishing you were a supporting actor in someone else's life, or at the very least a chipping floor, something that stays in place, something not girl. Mary, stop trying to die. I know sometimes you feel less than human, more like an unknown planet no one cares about, more like hot guilt, more like a catalog of trauma. Mary, stop trying to die. There is nothing better than looking into the mirror to discover infinite doors, to witness your own bloom. You are the best version of the story. We're all waiting for you.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.